All right, so this is my final presentation on my extension that I've created for myPL. To jump right into things, the extension that I added was adding default values in structs. Similar to the syntax of C or C++, you can either instantiate a field of a struct the standard way, just a semicolon. However, if you do want to pass it a default value, you can use this curly brace syntax here, pass the value in, and then that will be set. So then looking at how you actually use this extension, you can see here we've defined a struct called struct s, which we've passed a default value of dog and 5 to our two fields. Now, when instantiating a new struct, you can either pass it no parameters here, and that will set the values of each field to our default values that we've created. Or you can still, in the traditional way, pass in 2 parameters and and overwrite those default values that we've set. Now, I will say you need to either pass no parameters and use all default values, or pass all parameters. I wasn't able to get it where you can pass like a partial amount of parameters, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So looking at how this extension would be used, I have a little clip here. Oh, we might have to present this to actually see it. So you can see here, I've created 2 test files here where I've defined, the first one I've defined a struct n, and have 4 fields here, all using default values. So a value of 10, dog, 0.05, and then a new array here. Now in our actual function, I've defined 2 new structs, one where I overwrite all of the values, passing in 4 parameters, and then secondly, a struct n2, which passes no parameters, and so it will default to using those default values. Now, to test that this is actually working, I just print out a bunch of values and verify that everything is correct. The first set of print statements is testing that our n1 value has actually overridden those values. And then our second set of print statements is testing that our default values have actually been used. So if you go ahead and run this, you will see that yes, in fact, all values are as we expected. The overwritten values have been used, and then our default values. It was also we were able to verify that did get overridden, or that the default values were used. Excuse me. Now for our second test, wanted to get like a real life example of how this extension might have been used. So I defined a struct called settings, where we have brightness, a string theme, and then a bool notifications if your notifications are on or off. And you can see we've passed default values for all 3 of those fields. Then we make a function to display all those settings, so it'll just print what is currently in the struct, and then a simple function to change those settings. And in our main function, we define a new struct called settings, and we don't pass through any parameters, so the default values will be used. We display the current state of those settings, change them, and then display them again. So if we run this program, you will see, first off, we have our default values there, 75, light, and true. Now it'll prompt us to change those values. So we'll change the brightness to 100, the theme to dark, and we'll turn off our notifications. And once we print those, you can see, yes, in fact, the values have been overridden. So moving on, let's pause this here if we can. I want to pull up some of the tests I've created. So one thing that I wanted to verify is that any of the changes that I was making wasn't breaking any of the previous functionality that we had. And so I imported a lot, any like tests that I could find from previous homeworks. So this is all redundant to go over, but all previous tests from previous homework assignments that had to deal with anything path, struct, var definition. Those are kind of the things that I was changing for my extension, and so I wanted to just continually run this suite of tests to make sure I wasn't breaking anything as I was kind of going through with everything. However, then I also went through and made my own set of test suites that was testing exactly this new extension here. And so we went through and I focused on parsing. So we have some parsing tests here with just basic default values, passing in arrays and new structs here, and then a mixed bag of different definitions. We also did the same thing with AST parser test cases. And then semantic checking was the probably most interesting thing to figure out because we had to verify that um, that our value that we were passed here actually matches the data type of our variable. So we have some positive test cases, and then also some negative ones, seeing if we pass in a wrong value. You can see here a string of 1 should throw an error. Um, invalid. This we wanted to make sure that this wasn't ever called, this kind of recursive call to another default or a struct with default values, because that would kind of throw a recursive loop where we continually try to make new structs with default values, and we'd get caught in a loop there. And so the struct has to be defined with, if a struct is used as a default value in a parameter, it must have all of its arguments passed here. And then another invalid kind of mix of wrong data types here. So looking at the overview of kind of what I had to modify or change in the myPL pipeline, we start off with the AST class, and what I did is added a default value, which is just a simple R value. That could be a simple, or just an R value. It could be a simple R value, or clearly a new R value if we're looking at an array or struct. And this will allow us to, in our var_def, when we're defining our fields, we can check if there's a default value and then save it here in the class. With the simple parser, clearly there's now an optional kind of data type or an R value that's surrounded by braces. And so as we're checking the fields for a struct, we check if there is a L brace. And if so, we check that R value and then close it off with that R brace and semicolon. With the AST parser, very similar. The only change here is that as we're checking the R value, when that data type is returned, we will save it in that default value field in the var_def class, like I showed just previously before. And then with the semantic checker, I kind of alluded to this previously, but we needed to check for mismatched types. And so as we're going through, we'll check to see if a default value is in fact has been recorded by our AST parser. We will check that value, and then clearly this is a small snippet of code, but then we go through and verify that was in fact the data type of the field that we're the data type of the field of the struct that the default value has been assigned to. And then we also need to make sure that, like, with the struct, if a struct is used as a default value, or if you're just instantiating a new one, we need to check if either none of the parameters have been passed or all of them have been passed. I mentioned that, like, the partial passing of parameters should throw an error. So we check this here. If we have a struct and we have a default value, then we go in and make sure the correct number of params have been passed. So based on my check-in too, I would just wanted to implement like a very, implement this default value feature, and I was able to accomplish everything that I had kind of planned out for myself from our previous check-ins, which I was really happy with. It was a bit frustrating because some of the things I didn't complete were, I think one of the biggest things was this idea of passing like partial params. As I was trying to make like interesting use cases for this extension, I realized that I did want sometimes to only, create a new struct where I modified maybe one of the parameters, but the rest were left default. And this was something that I was having difficulty kind of tracking. But if I had more time, then I suppose we would go through, and that would be one of the first things I'd want to change and update here. So And we'll see. Maybe if I have some time this summer, I'll get back to it. It's going to be tough to leave myPL alone now. But yeah, that's my extension. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowers. I'll catch you next year, and then really enjoy your summer.